Great.
Yeah. Okay, so thanks for coming, folks. This is external seminar, and our colleague Matt Schmidt from the University of Florida has been able to come over for conferences later on this week down in London, but has kindly agreed to come up and visit us here at the OU today. And we'll be around at lunchtime as well as a little bit this afternoon if folks want to follow up on any of the discussions and stuff from this morning. So thanks for coming out. I will not hold up the proceedings any, but pass over to Matt and then you can come back up at the end and we'll facilitate a bit of conversations and
Sounds great.
questions and stuff.
Yeah. So how long am I going until?
Your call. We should let people go for lunch at about 1 o'clock. Or no, sorry, what? It's 11, so like 12 o'clock.
I don't think I present.
We won't go over an hour.
Good.
But if you want to do less than that, is that okay for folks? Yeah, we're good. Okay, great. Wonderful.
All right, great. Well, thanks everyone for coming. I appreciate you being here today. And thanks for the invite, Trevor. Really appreciate it. It's great to be here at the Open University and finally to get to see what I read so much about during my PhD program. So as Trevor mentioned, my name is Matthew Schmidt. I'm an associate professor at the University of Florida. And until just about a month ago, I was at the University of Cincinnati. So I'm kind of in between places right now. And so a lot of the work that you're going to see was developed while I was at the University of Cincinnati, and the campus imagery and so on that you'll see is from there. The talk that I'm going to be giving today is about how we've developed a low-cost, spherical video-based virtual reality system for adults with autism. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that. But I also brought some of the kit that I've used to develop this system. And when we're done today, I can kind of give you a hands-on with that if you're interested in seeing it. And we can do a bit of a show and tell where you can actually experience the VR system. So why don't we just go ahead and get started. A little bit about me. My research focus is the design, development, implementation, and evaluation of advanced learning technologies with a specific focus on individuals with disabilities. I work with youth with traumatic brain injury, epilepsy, diabetes, as well as adults on the autism spectrum. So my research approach is applied research and development, and what that tends to mean is I use reflexive inquiry approaches such as design-based research, user-centered design, design thinking, as well as user experience design. So my research is very iterative and very pragmatic in its approach. Tell you a little bit about the project that I've developed. So Virtuoso doesn't kind of exist in a vacuum, but instead it exists within a variety of different pieces. So Virtuoso is the technology innovation arm of Impact Innovation, and Impact Innovation as an adult day program for adults on the autism spectrum. And these are adults who are severely impacted by autism. So this is traditionally referred to as low functioning, but we try to avoid a focus on functionality. Our focus with Virtuoso is adaptive skills. And adaptive skills are those skills that are needed for everyday life. So those would be vocational skills, social skills, etc. And this, of course, all is happening within kind of the context or the frame of autism. So the specific focus of Virtuoso is to promote the acquisition and transfer of adaptive skills in a safe, completely controllable virtual reality environment. And this is for adults who are severely impacted by autism. I talked a little bit about adaptive skills already, so I'll just kind of move to the next slide. The skill that we're specifically focusing on with Virtuoso is using public transportation in a safe and socially appropriate manner. And that's because the adult day program, when it focuses on these vocational skills, many of the job placements that our participants have are geographically distant from kind of the hub or the nexus of where the adults come for their programming. And so as such, you need to have some form of transportation to get there. And we have a university shuttle system on campus. However, there's not a whole lot out there that gives us guidance on how to train our participants to use the university shuttle system, and indeed, public transportation and transportation in general is cited as one of the most pervasive barriers for individuals with disabilities, and that would include people with autism. And so to develop this training, there's a lot of research around using virtual reality with people with autism, but there's very little research about how to transfer skills that are acquired in a virtual reality environment into the real world. And in fact, with people with autism, generalization and transfer is by far the biggest challenge in all intervention research. And so it's quite difficult to get skills to transfer whether you're doing a face-to-face intervention or a technology-based intervention. And as such, what we've done is we've developed a tiered approach or a stage-wise approach to really promote this generalization and transfer of skills. So this is a very intentional and careful design, and it is also designed using many of the best practices that have emerged from the research on virtual reality for people with autism. So what we've done is we've taken a 4-stage approach where initially we start by introducing the skill using a simple social narrative approach. And to do that, we present essentially text and imagery on an iPad and a slideshow where we walk through and we put the user in a first-person perspective. Today, I'm going to be engaging in shuttle training. I will begin by checking my schedule. I will pay attention to my helper, right? That's kind of the language that surrounds a social narrative. And then the next step is to do video modeling using the spherical video-based virtual reality system that I'm going to be talking about today. And so video modeling is an approach, an evidence-based practice that has quite a bit of empirical support behind it, but far less is known about how to create 360 video-based video models. So in some ways, what we're doing here is breaking new ground. Then we move from modeling of the task to actual rehearsal of the task. And when we rehearse the task, we start in a safe and completely controllable virtual environment. So this is a head-mounted display-based VR environment. We're using Oculus Rift and HTC Vive. And our participants join a multi-user environment where they're joined by an online guide who acts as a coach to kind of walk them through the steps of getting onto the university shuttle. And then following that practice, and we actually have a couple of different levels of difficulty where we incorporate more traffic, we incorporate more people on the university campus and so on. And after they've gone through a couple of stages, we then go and we perform the task in the real world, right? And we've seen evidence of transfer, but our research is quite preliminary, as is our data analysis at this point. So today, we're going to be spending our time talking a little bit about the step with the modeling of the task. So what you can see here, this is just the screenshots of the social narrative that we provide. And as you can see, we just have simple text with simple videos, and you just tap next to kind of move through. I talked a little bit about the video modeling already. And the way that the videos are presented to our participants, the VR system that we're using is based on mobile phone VR. So we're using just a simple Android device as well as a Google Daydream View, or we can also use a Google Cardboard. So really low cost, low complexity, head-mounted display-based VR. And so here's some screenshots of what you would see in the VR system. You start off by being presented with imagery of the UC campus where the training would typically take place if you were doing real-world training. So this is our quad. And you can see that there are these 3 signs or icons that are then presented. And when you're looking at it in the VR display, you can take a reticle, mouse it over, or view over one of them. The icon will then grow. You can click it, and that will take you to the next screen. So this is going to take you to another level in the hierarchy of navigation. And here we can learn about the 4 different steps of, so we clicked on going to the shuttle. There would then be 4 steps in going to the shuttle, such as where to go, walking to the shuttle, checking the app, and getting on the shuttle. Now we've tried to universally design this because we know that some of our participants are pre-literate. And so while we do have text on here, we also are using numbers so that they're able to see what order they need to go through these using. And we're also using iconography that should be very familiar to them. This comes from a picture exchange system, or PEX. And PEX is an augmentative communication system that many people with autism use. And then finally, once we've selected a video, so I think that we've selected number 1, which is where to go, we have the guide come in and then begin working through the task. So the participant then sees the task with the first-person view and follows along. And they walk through a variety of steps. There are 4 steps involved before you get on the bus. And what you see here, this is our last step where we're actually going to board the university shuttle. And so we put out some of our preliminary findings in interactive learning environments, and the citation is right there. And then following that video modeling task, what would end up happening is you would then be rehearsing the task in the fully immersive VR environment. So up in the top left, this is the Impact Suite where Impact Innovation is housed at the University of Cincinnati. And we modeled that suite based on floor plans, so architectural floor plans, just so that we are able to have as much connection with the real world as we possibly can. People with autism are very concrete thinkers, and so trying to recreate the real world with as much behavioral and photographic fidelity as we can really goes a long way in terms of promoting that transfer of skills. So that's Dr. Schmidt up there in the top left, training a couple of guys, and then there's Dr. Schmidt there in the bottom right with one of our participants actually engaging in the system. As you can see, he's actually sitting down. He's not standing, and that's intentional. And that's because we have some serious concerns about cybersickness. When you're using virtual reality, cybersickness is a major concern, and when you're dealing with neurodiverse populations, such as individuals with autism, who have profound differences in the way that they perceive things in terms of their sensory perception, we need to be very careful about that. So that's something that we've really worked hard on. And sitting down is one of those things. There's some debate about whether standing or sitting is more conducive to kind of alleviating some of those cybersickness symptoms. We've opted to go for the sitting approach. It's also a little bit easier when you're not used to VR because you can bump into things, you can fall over, so it's a little safer. So let's talk a little bit about our research and development. So we've gone through 3 phases of R&D to date. We started out with some prototyping where we were really just kind of analyzing and exploring what existed out there and trying some things out. We did a pretty broad product review. We developed our technology infrastructure, and that included the methods and processes for capturing video, producing video, and then presenting video, and then building various apparatus. So how do you go about capturing first-person video is an interesting question when you're trying to build something that's low cost, right? So a lot of 360 video capture, when you're going on the professional end, they have very specific apparatus that is used to capture video that has very little jitter or shaking, because that can be somewhat disconcerting when you're in a VR environment. So they'll have rigs and they'll have gimbals and things of that nature, and we had none of that. Instead, we had a backpack with a monopod in it, and we just kind of put the monopod in, and it sat above the person's head who was walking around with it. And that wasn't necessarily the best approach, but it was our first approach, and we did improve that as we moved forward. Then as we moved into phase 2, we moved from doing video capture with kind of a very low-end device. So we started with this device, which is just kind of an accessory for an iPhone. And as you can see, it's got cameras on both sides. I'll go into that in a little bit. And we moved from that because the video quality looks good on a desktop, but when you put it into a 360-degree head-mounted view, you're looking at the pixels that are about an inch from your eye. And so you're able to pick up on many of the imperfections in the video. The videos were very grainy and just unclear. And so we really wanted to up the quality of the video, and we found that there is definitely a correlation between video quality and sensations of immersion. So the higher quality that you have, the more of a feeling of telepresence that you will have. You will feel like you're actually there in the environment. So a lot of what we did at that point was to focus on improving our quality and improving our processes, given the kind of low-cost equipment that we were focusing on. And at that time, we also developed an Android app, which I showed you in some of the previous screenshots. And I'm sorry, in the third phase, which we just completed, I want to say June 10th, we refined our video production process even more. We moved to a different camera, so I brought the GoPro Fusion camera with me now, which captures video in better resolution. We really improved the usability of our Android app based on some of our findings from our formative evaluation. And we conducted a second formative evaluation, and we're analyzing those results now. So let's talk a little bit about how videos are created. So when you're creating 360-degree video, you have a camera like this that has a lens on both sides. This one, I believe, only has a single sensor. Some of them will have a sensor for each one of the lenses, and it'll save the videos typically to an SD card that's on the camera. The two videos are kind of 180-degree views each, and those are then stitched together into a single 360-degree view. Following that, they go into a post-processing process where you're going to use an app or some other kind of software, whether that's on your phone or on the camera itself or on your PC. And then you can transcode them and do some post-processing and prepare them for a headset. This might be a little bit easier to follow. So you start out by capturing your videos, then you stitch them together. You do the post-processing, and once you've processed them, you can view them on your devices. And really kind of the difficult piece is how you're going to go ahead and view them on your device, because there's not a lot of kind of common off-the-shelf software that you can pull from. And that's one of the things we found in our product review is really high quality, highly usable approaches to viewing 360-degree videos don't exist. I mean, you can find kind of a menu-based system. You can use YouTube, you can use Facebook, but if you really want to create kind of an encapsulated, highly usable and enjoyable user experience, you're really going to have to kind of do it yourself at this point. So I talked a little bit about some of the cameras that we use. This is the Insta 360. That's a pretty cheap phone or a pretty cheap camera. Then we went into the Samsung Gear, and then we ended up finally with the GoPro Fusion. The Insta 360 Nano is not a bad device if what you want to do is just display your videos, let's say on Facebook or YouTube, or just using a desktop display, where the panning and tilting is going to happen with a mouse. So you're able to kind of scroll around the video and engage in it that way. That actually is very good. And for the price, I think that it's a worthwhile investment if that's what you're interested in doing. However, if you're wanting to do anything with an immersive experience using a headset, you're probably going to want to up the resolution substantially. So what we have here is the Samsung Gear 360, which is an inexpensive 360-degree camera. They have two different versions. We played with both. The second version is not a great improvement. It's more of an evolutionary step, but it's decent. And when we bought them, they were around $350. I think they've gone down substantially since then. But one of the things that was problematic, it comes with some good post-processing software, but there's a lot of shakiness in the videos, and we were unable to accommodate for that. So ultimately, that was one of the biggest complaints that we had from our participants. So we have some stairs that we go down in our videos and so on. And when you're doing that can be really jarring. And they mentioned that they started to feel sick to their stomach, and they had the cold sweats and so on. And that's indicative of cybersickness, and we really want to avoid that. So the GoPro Fusion was released just a few months after we finished our data analysis. And we were looking at this, and we were looking at a couple of other devices, and we ultimately ended up going with this because it had the highest resolution, firstly, so it records in 5.2K. But more importantly was in the post-processing software, it was really able to correct for any of that jitter or that shakiness in the video, and smooths out the video in a way that I have no idea how it's going on. But when you view it in the 360-degree viewer, it's incredibly smooth and really reduced those symptoms of cybersickness to the point that with our 360-degree videos during our last formative evaluation, we had 0 symptoms. So that was really good. Now in terms of stitching, so remember if you think back to the kind of conceptual overview of the process, you start by capturing your video and then you need to stitch it together. The Insta360 has this on-camera stitching, which is not so great, and then it can also stitch the videos together on your camera. And when you see poor stitching, what you're going to end up seeing is a very visible line between the 2 videos when they're put together. And as the video moves around, you can definitely see that, and it can be disconcerting. The Samsung Gear was a little bit better. This Gear 360 Action Director, which is software that comes bundled with the cameras, is actually pretty usable and can produce some decent videos. So, I mean, if you want to put out $350 for a camera and be able to just kind of hit the ground running, that's a place to start. With the GoPro Fusion, there's a mobile app, there's also a desktop app, and it does a fantastic job. So you download your videos onto your mobile phone or onto your laptop or desktop, do the post-processing there, and it turns out great. Now, once you've got the videos, what do you do with them? They're kind of in a raw format. And so what you can see here is this is a 360-degree video that's kind of pulled across, a 16 by 9 format, and that's how you actually do the video processing. One of the great things about 360-degree video, if you want to get into virtual reality, it doesn't require any knowledge of how to develop video games, how to develop 3D models, how to work in 3D game engines. All it requires is that you understand how to edit video. And editing the video requires some tweaks in terms of thinking in 360 degrees while working in 2D. But if you have any knowledge of a video editing tool, you'll be able to create 360-degree videos or SVVR experiences. So with our first version, we used OpenShot, which is this free and open source video production tool. We then moved to Adobe Premiere, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And Premiere, the reason that we went with it is we just had experience with it, and it had been provided to us for free, so we were able to use that. In terms of post-processing, there's a couple of ways that you can go about it. What we use to just kind of ease the process is a tool called VotoBox, which will produce videos for HTTP live streaming. And all this requires is a simple web server to host your files. So you don't have to have a streaming server, you can just have an Apache server. Put your files up there, and then you have kind of an index that you can reference, and you can use a number of tools to view those videos. You can also do this with other tools, but this is a nice graphical interface, so pretty easy. In terms of the smartphone app, we created the SVVR app using Unity and the Google VR SDK for Unity with Android. All of it was free of cost. The way that the Virtuoso-SVVR app works is a video producer will create new videos, and then the admin can publish those videos out to a variety of different headsets using the software. We can change the layout, so those icons that you saw in the interface, we can add more, we can take them away, and so on. And then on the user side, we're able to stream the videos, we can actually download them and save them to our device, and that's particularly useful if you're going to be using the software when you're not around a network, because the videos are quite massive, and they can take up a lot of room on your device, so there's a little trade-off there. Am I going to download or am I going to stream? one of the reasons that we did not wrap the videos into the app itself is some of these videos are 2 or 3 gigabytes. And if you've got a phone that's got 32 gigs on it, you don't really want one app taking up all of your storage. So that's one of the reasons that we went with streaming. In order to configure the smartphone app, we wanted to have something that was really simple for a developer to go in and modify, and so the entire thing can be modified just with simple XML. So I can go into an XML file, I can change the layout, I can change the URL where the videos are streamed from, and so on. And then in terms of viewing, we wanted to target really kind of low-end, inexpensive smartphone-based VR. So we went with the Google Cardboard, which is $25 in the US right now, and you can get knockoff Google Cardboards for $5. One of the things about the Cardboard, though, is that it's really dependent on the quality of your phone, and your viewing experience is going to be severely impacted if you have a low-end phone. So you're going to see quite a bit of artifacting and so on. It also has a very limited field of view, and as such, the sense of immersion that you get with the Cardboard is actually quite low. And that raises some questions about transfer of skills, because there's a direct connection between your sense of immersion and the amount of learning that's going to happen, right? So when you have a lower sense of immersion, the question then becomes, does that mean you're going to have a lower level of learning? And those are questions that remain open at this point. In terms of the Google Daydream, it does require a higher-end smartphone. So you need to have kind of a Google Pixel or something of that nature. We're using the Moto Z or Moto Z. This also utilizes a wand controller. So the Google Cardboard has a button on the device itself that you hold to your head, and you kind of just press the button in order to select things. But this has more of a remote. So if you're familiar with the Nintendo Switch or the Wii, this operates in a similar way. One of the reasons that we wanted to go with a Google Cardboard was when Google developed the Cardboard, they specifically developed it to alleviate symptoms of cybersickness. And one of the reasons that people have this sensation of cybersickness has to do with the way that you move your head when you're using virtual reality, when you're using a headset. So when you have quick movements with your neck, that can really induce some of those sensations of vertigo. However, when you're holding a VR headset to your face, you're not able to move your head. In fact, everything is kind of controlled by your torso. And that is one of the things that kind of helps reduce that feeling of vertigo. And on top of that, the Google Cardboard was specifically engineered, intentionally engineered, with these large gaps so you can see out, and that reduces kind of your feeling of being present. Again, reductions in sense of immersion at the cost of immersion, you're not going to feel so much cybersickness. So the Google Daydream View is an inexpensive piece of gear. It's about $100. It has a much greater field of view, and as such, it also attaches to your head and fills in any of the gaps that you might see with the Google Cardboard. And as such, you have a much greater sensation of immersion using this device. You can also view these videos using the desktop display, and we did this again because we wanted to universally design this software. If it came down to our participants were unable to use virtual reality for whatever reason, we wanted them to still be able to engage with the software. So you can view Virtuoso-SVVR without using a head-mounted display on your phone, and you can still move it around, pan and tilt, and so on. You can also use the VLC media player on your desktop and use a mouse to move around in the environment as well. And VLC is free and open source that you can download. So let's talk a little bit about our formative evaluation. So in summer of 2018, we undertook a usage test, an extended usage test and formative evaluation. And we wanted to specifically look at the user experience of Virtuoso, the feasibility, the relevance, and the usability. And to that end, we were looking at all aspects of Virtuoso, not just the SVVR app. So we were looking at our social narratives, we were looking at the SVVR app, and we were looking at the fully immersive VR app. We did this with both experts as well as with individuals on the autism spectrum. Our research questions focused on ease of use, user experience, feasibility, and relevance. So we started this with an expert review, approached 4 experts, received their feedback, did an iteration of improvements, and then we went into a structured usage testing phase. For the expert review, we proposively sampled 4 experts. We had 2 special education professors who were involved, one of which was the director of the impact program. We had a usability expert from another university do a heuristic evaluation for us. And then we had one of the staff members who worked very closely with some of our participants engage in the expert review. What we did was we would have them engage with the software. We would walk through it in a structured way. And then we had a series of structured questions that we would ask them, and we had them fill out a system usability scale. So I think I just covered this slide. In terms of our analysis, what we were looking at were the mean usability ratings from the system usability scale, as well as a composite usability score across devices. So we were using both the Google Daydream as well as the Google Cardboard, and we wanted to see what those composite scores would look like, as well as a response analysis where we were taking Nielsen's usability heuristics and applying those. And we also did an inductive thematic analysis using some qualitative methods. Then in phase 2, we did a extended usage test where we had 5 participants on the autism spectrum come in and work through all steps of the training that we had developed to date, both in SVVR as well as in fully immersive virtual reality. And these were participants who we identified based on their level of independence, how acute their autism was, as well as some scores on standardized assessments. So one of the things that we needed was we needed participants who were verbal and capable of speech, and not all, about 50% of people with autism never gain the ability to speak, and that bears out also in our participants in the impact program. So let's take a look at some of our findings. So over 5 days, we did 10 sessions. Each participant did a SVVR session as well as a VR session. We tried to counterbalance the conditions so that we had them trying the software with no headset, trying the software with the Google Cardboard, trying the software with the Daydream, and we tried to counterbalance the conditions with virtual reality as well. Each session took about 20 minutes to complete, and that included a training session. And in fact, the training for the SVVR was remarkable in my opinion, because we would give our participants the headset, show them how to use it within 30 seconds, you point the reticle and then press the button, and they were off. So the usability, at least the learnability we found, was quite high. For our preliminary analysis, we calculated our system usability scale scores, calculated some simple descriptive statistics, and then we had a doctoral student analyze some field notes that we created using inductive analysis. Excuse me. One of the things we found was the experts really preferred the Cardboard over the Daydream view. They found it to be far more simple, and they thought that that would really bear out well with our adults on the spectrum. Interestingly enough, we did not find that same thing with our adults. Our adults seemed to prefer the more immersive experience, and in terms of usability challenges, we didn't see any difference in terms of which device they used. In terms of the experts' perceptions of usability, so they scored the Google Cardboard much higher than the Daydream, but the scale that we used basically says if you are able to achieve a usability score of above 68, that's about average usability, and as you can see, both of these are over 10 points above that. If we take a look at the nature of the user experience, The way that we characterized that based on our thematic analysis was that overall it was generally positive. As I mentioned before, our participants learned to use the system very quickly. They found it to be particularly motivating, so this was something that was very reinforcing for them. Some of them wanted to come back and use it again. Every single one, when we asked if they would want to do it again, indicated that they would. Some of them asked to do it again at the same session, so they watched all of the videos and then watched them again. But we did see some evidence of cybersickness. I've got a great image that unfortunately I didn't include here. I have one of my participants actually laying back in a chair, and I think what he said was, "I don't think VR is for me." 5 minutes later, he was back saying, "I want to do it again." Right? So clearly this is something that, despite these sensations of cybersickness, they wanted to come back. These were mild sensations of cybersickness. It's not like our participants were vomiting or anything like that, which happens, right? That was a good finding, just that they wanted to come back, that they were so engaged, that they were so interested. In terms of the alignment with our design goals, as far as feasibility, we found that our design really does take into account the unique needs of our users. We also found that the interface is not distracting, but instead it's quite engaging, and that it promotes cognitive accessibility. So a lot of my work doesn't focus on physical accessibility issues, but instead cognitive accessibility issues. And so a lot of the universal design approaches that we use are designed to promote cognitive accessibility. And we did see some evidence of that. Interestingly enough, our experts took note of the evidence-based practices that we had designed in. Those are things that kind of exist behind the scenes, and made note of them, as well as some of the universally designed pieces. In terms of relevance, one thing that we maintained from the get-go was that this wasn't a single-shot training, but instead we designed it so that you could go through it as many times as needed in order to acquire the skill and then have the skill transfer to the real world. And our experts noted immediately, they said this would not work without multiple viewings, right? Specifically the SVVR piece. In terms of the visual fidelity, moderately adequate. That's probably the blandest thing I could say today. And I think moderately adequate is a good starting place, but there's a reason why we continued to improve the visual fidelity of our system, right? There was definitely a degree of immersion that was noted, but we were not satisfied with that degree of immersion. So what's this mean? Well, first of all, we had a very small sample, and this is a very common limitation for any research that involves people with autism, particularly adults. This is a low incidence disability, and so this group is typically going to see limitations in the research for that reason. The findings that we had here were quite preliminary, and what I told you today is also preliminary. That's why we've done a second iteration of our formative evaluation. And also, we were only looking at user experience within a single context, and we'd like to see what that would look like when we generalize it out. In terms of ease of use, we do feel strongly that we should focus on a single type of hardware instead of kind of diluting our experience. So in terms of your development capacity, right, if you're trying to support two separate pieces of hardware, you're going to have a diluted experience. And as such, we decided to focus specifically on the Google Cardboard due to its ease of use and its cost. However, there is the question, the level of immersion with the Cardboard, is that sufficient to impact learning? It looks like it is, but I think that far more research is needed there, and there's literally nothing out there on this right now. And in terms of cybersickness, almost all studies on cybersickness focus on neurotypical populations. There's a single study that focuses on cybersickness with individuals with autism, and we're trying to change that, and so we're actually doing a couple of studies on cybersickness. We did see that we had 2 participants who verbally expressed some cybersickness, but none of our participants quit due to it, and many of them wanted to come back and try it again. So let's talk a little bit about some of the current work. I mentioned that we had made some improvements to our Android app, really focused on improving our usability, and the preliminary findings from our study that we just finished really do bear that out. It's far more usable. And we also found that oftentimes the streaming approach, while we intended to use the streaming approach to reduce the amount of space that was used on a phone, it's really highly dependent on the quality of your network. And so if you've got a poor network or if you're on a mobile network, then that's going to substantially impact your viewing experience. So that's why we incorporated that download functionality, where we can download it and then view it. In terms of the video improvements, I alluded to this already. So using the GoPro Fusion to reduce the shaking and the jitter and to really improve the video quality. And here's just an example of the video quality. So up on top, we've got video that was captured with the Samsung Gear 360. And on the bottom, you can see video that was captured with the GoPro Fusion. And I don't think this actually does justice to the differences. So the top one, I've actually zoomed it out as far as I possibly can. And this one is only zoomed out about 50%. So I actually have another 50% of video data that you can't see there. Now, if you pay attention to, if you want to see where the differences are, it's difficult to see in 2D. Pay attention to vertical lines. And you're going to see on the top that those vertical lines are a little bit more vague. There's a bit more blur on them than what you see here in the bottom. And in addition to that, I think you can immediately see the difference in terms of the brightness, right? So I think that there's definitely some difference in terms of just immediate catching your eye. And of course, also, since my wife is in the second one, it's far better. So our current work, we just completed this formative evaluation where what we did this time is we wanted to see how the experiences of individuals with autism might compare to the experiences of neurotypical people. And so what we did was we ran 6 neurotypical individuals through and 6 people with autism. Using the same approach as before, but instead of counterbalancing, we focused on a single piece of hardware, and that was the Google Cardboard for the SVVR piece and the Oculus Rift for the immersive piece. We also used a variety of instruments instead of just the system usability scale, such as the motion sickness assessment questionnaire, focusing on those feelings of cybersickness, as well as the temple presence inventory to determine that level of sense of immersion or being there. We also captured screen recordings and webcam recordings while they were using the software. We were able to kind of mash those together. And they did this across 3 sessions. So this time we actually had an intentional training session. Then we moved to our first review of the videos, and then we did it a second time. In terms of future directions, we do have some considerations of scale because this is something that requires some people who are very highly technical in order to produce and to develop and then to push it out. So we have some questions about developing some practitioner-friendly tools, which is really kind of focused on closing that research to practice gap, as well as thinking about how we might be able to use 360 video to do some live encoding or live streaming, and thinking about maybe some role play situations that we might be able to do with that. Of course, the question of immersion in SVVR remains. We're very interested in investigating the sensations of immersion, coupling that with the headset quality. And then there's the related question of how immersion then maps onto learning outcomes. And that concludes my talk for today. I think I'm 1 minute over. Apologies. All right, thank you. So as I mentioned before, I have the gear up here and I'd be happy to do a bit of a show and tell, hands-on, let you experience it before Sarah's actually seen it when she was visiting University of Cincinnati. Did I get you in it as well, Trevor? Yeah. So I'd be happy to let you experience it. It's quite something when you get to see it in 3D as opposed to 2D. But let's open the floor for some questions. You guys have any questions for me? Yeah.
I noticed early on, the thing that interested me was in terms of the motion sickness, I remember the first time I played on Oculus, it was awful. I spent the afternoon literally lying down. The big thing was the frame rate. Now, what's your opinion and experience with, you talk about the high definition of the video, but not a lot about the frame rate of the video?
Absolutely. So frame rate matters. And frame rate matters when you're doing SVVR less than when you're doing fully immersive kind of video game based or virtual world based VR, right? The thing is when you're using a device like the Google Cardboard, which is by virtue of its build, it's less immersive, right? If you're panning and zooming, you're going to see some screen tearing if you have a 30 frame per second piece, right? You will actually see the frames. And you can perceive them because your eye is just so close to the phone itself. So amping that up to about 60 frames per second is recommended, but that of course is going to double your video size, right? So there's always kind of that question of what's the balance between the size of your video, the capacity of the device that you have, and the user experience.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great talk. With respect to the motion sickness, of course, the technology helps you in some sense, but it's actually also brought on by technology. It is the mismatch between our own sensors and inner ear and how we perceive the world, and that mismatch that we see in the virtual reality. So there is some residual that you can't doctor away with technology.
Yeah.
There's something profoundly specific about this type of motion sickness. Is it worth it? Is the expense of paying for the equipment and experiencing the motion sickness worth the goal of experiencing how to get on a bus and use transport?
Mm-hmm.
Or is you also are able to see it see the films on a normal screen? How does that compare? What's the difference between those two?
Mm-hmm. There's a lot to unpack there. So that's a really insightful question, personally. And that's the question that we're dealing with right now. So we have stumbled into an ethical conundrum. And it's something that hasn't really been considered in the literature yet. There really are no ethical guidelines for what we're doing right now. The literature to this date, I would characterize it as exuberant and looking at VR almost as a silver bullet for people with autism. You have this methodological playground where you have control over everything. And you're able to control the input stimuli, reduce it, increase difficulty, increase complexity. And the idea is that by so doing, we're going to be able to impact outcomes profoundly. But the research does not actually bear out. So unfortunately, the research outcomes are modest at best. And so I've been doing this for about 10 years now. And this is a frustration that is beginning to really come about in all of the researchers who are working on this right now. Where are the findings? I don't know if you guys had the commercial back in the 90s of Where's the Beef, but there was a Where's the Beef commercial in the US, and that's really the question that we have right now is where's the beef? Where are the outcomes? And we don't have them. And there's also the question of these outcomes were supposed to be able to transfer from VR environments to the real world, but that was an assumption that, again, has not borne out with empirical evidence. So the question of is it worth it is a question that I'm asking myself right now. Is it worth it? And there are areas where I believe it is worth it, particularly in areas that are high risk. And one area that's high risk is using public transportation. And that risk is both physical, because if you are not familiar with how public transportation works and so on, right, there's the possibility that you could be hit by a bus or worse. There are also other risks involved, such as engaging in behaviors that are going to be perceived socially as inappropriate because of a lack of acclimation to the process. So people with autism tend to be very concrete and very routine driven. And when they are removed from their routines, they they can act out in terms of what would be considered by most people to be socially inappropriate ways, right? And that can cause some challenges. I think the question of whether it's worth it or not is where we start. But when you think more deeply about it, the question becomes not does VR work, but how do we make VR work better? Under what conditions? In which contexts? For which behaviors? And given the heterogeneity of this disorder, the massive differences between people, for whom, right? Most of the research has been done on children and youth. Very little has been done on adults, right? So is this an appropriate approach for adults is a question that bears asking. So I don't have answers for you, but I have quite a few questions.
And that is cool research, of course.
Thank you. Great question, by the way.
I noticed you said that a level of immersion is important for transfer, and transfer is particularly difficult for people with autism. To kind of link that together, I'm kind of wondering whether also sense of immersion is perhaps different for people with autism. Perhaps the same kit. I'm kind of speculating. Perhaps the same kit wouldn't give the same level of immersion to someone with autism as to someone without autism, and that could be linked to the limitations of transfer. So I thought it was interesting that you're looking at sense of immersion in this current study.
So you're getting into kind of one of the core issues of using virtual reality for people with autism. So in this area, there is a principle called the assumption of veridicality, which is the assumption is that the more realistic that you can make a virtual environment, then the more likely that what is learned in the virtual environment will transfer to the real world. The idea is if you create an environment that looks and behaves as realistically as possible, then people will behave within that environment realistically, right? And then by virtue of that, they will transfer what they learn in that environment to the real environment. So you need to make it map to the real environment as closely as possible, which is one of the reasons that we focused so strongly on creating accurate representations of campus and of the area where the impact program is, right? And one of the nice things about spherical video-based virtual reality is that it is a very accurate representation, right? As opposed to 3D models, which are close, but not exact. And so the idea is that if you make it as realistic as possible and you immerse your user in that you will have these generalization effects. Unfortunately, that does not bear out with the empirical evidence. There's very limited evidence that what is learned in VR actually transfers to the real world. And that's partially due to the research methods that are used, because we're doing this research with very small sample sizes. Most of the time, we don't have control groups. And on top of that, most of the research is quite limited. It'll happen over the course of a year or maybe 2 years, and then projects will be abandoned, right? So small research field, extreme limitations in the methods and processes. So questions of kind of verifying our assumptions empirically, really challenging. Did that answer your question?
Yes, partly, but I think what I was also thinking is that the people you're working with, the people with autism, may have a different sense of immersion from people without autism, as a kind of extra confound that you've somehow got to kind of work with.
Yes, you're absolutely right. So given these kind of profound differences across these people, and also not only the heterogeneity within that group, but also that we as neurotypical people cannot conceive of how they perceive the world, then that is indeed a confound. Yeah. So that's one of the questions that's beginning to kind of bubble up currently. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation. It looks like your approach has a strong limitation in the sense that you don't have a way to physically engage users during the training sessions. The fact that they're not standing, that they're sitting, they cannot touch the user. Actually, why you didn't consider, or maybe you didn't consider, I want to know why this, the reason behind this choice is a virtual environment rather than just a map piece of virtual reality, like using a room which you can show the 3D video and put a real piece of equipment from the bus or the ticket machine of someone pretending to be the bus driver. So to physically engage people in the training, plus reconstructing a little bit the context in which they're going to find. I mean, there is a reason for that, maybe budget-wise or just a choice of this approach, but so that you can combine physical training and...
Yeah. So you can probably sense that there's a continuum of technological complexity that's involved here, where we go from really low complexity, which is the tablet-based approach, to a bit more complexity, which is the low fidelity head-mounted displays, to full immersion head-mounted displays. And if we could go up another level, what you're describing, the cave-based environment, would definitely be the next approach. Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of generalization, I think that would actually have a substantial impact. But financial limitations, as well as development limitations, and so on, there's only so much that you can do, right? And there's also another piece to this where when you're kind of trying to immerse these people and you go across this continuum of technological complexity, it's also, that was kind of based on our structured ethical reflection, thinking about what if our users begin to have adverse effects based on using the technology, right? We're starting low and then moving up in complexity as opposed to just kind of starting with what we think would have the most impact, right? We're able to kind of stage-wise both acclimate them to it as well as be very sensitive to our observations of how they're perceiving the environment. Did I answer your question?
Yes, partially. Just a comment. This approach actually seems to be more complex, technologically speaking. Not in terms of costs, but in terms of the kind of experience you have. The fact that you really have to immerse yourself while having maybe just a big screen when you have a video. Actually, it's more complex as a setup, but it's less complex for the person. There is something they can do maybe on their own with a screen and a trinket they should be able to use. So.
You are correct. So partially what we're trying to do is we're trying to get some more insights about generalization, right? Transfer of skills. And that's why we've taken this complex approach. And so the design of our scaffolding, our instructional scaffolding, is such that we start with very strong scaffolds and then we fade those over time. And that then is faded as we go into more complex technological environments, yeah. Good. I think there was a question back there, yeah?
Probably follows on a little bit. I was trying to think through your scaffolding, because presumably you then are offering different levels of complexity of something to the user. Does that involve the 3D stuff, or is it more to do with the interface choices and presenting them?
Yeah, so we start with kind of just this low level, let's learn what we're going to do, and that's the design decision behind that is based on routines and kind of preparing someone to experience something new, right? And then we use the video model to show them what they're going to do and to immerse them in that. So in terms of the scaffolding there, that's all modeling. And then we switch when we move to the fully immersive kind of virtual worlds-based training. And that is then based on generalization. So we then apply the skill that we've seen modeled for us, by we, I'm of course referring to our participants. They then apply the skill, and within the 3D environment, that's where the scaffolds are strongest and then faded over time. So for example, we'll have actual arrows on the ground that are showing you where you need to walk, right, to get to the shuttle stop. And then those are, after they've gone through it a number of times, those are then removed. And then they do the wayfinding on their own, for example. Or we will have a modeled approach to using, there's an iPad app that shows when the shuttle is going to arrive, on which route. And that's something that a guide will walk them through in the virtual environment. And then over time, they then use the app themselves, right? And they search for their shuttle. So kind of moving towards more independence in that approach. So really, that's one of our design principles, is to promote as much independence as the participant is able to have. Yeah.
Maybe we should wrap up with that. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so let's
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think if folks do want to have a bit of a play with